Hi, my name is Nathan Sigworth. I'm the CEO and co-founder of PharmaCCX. We leverage technology and data to help pharma companies and payers seamlessly manage their entire price, negotiation, rebate, and deal management process for complex access agreements. Today is our third installment of Contingently Committed, our video series where we interview experts in our field to learn about the latest advancements at the intersection of technology, pharmaceuticals, and finance. Today, we're going to talk with my friend and an investor actually in our company, Alasdair Thong, who's a founding partner at Selvedge Ventures. Hey, Alasdair, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Good, thanks. It's delighted to be on here and happy to have a chat today about everything and anything you want to talk about. So, yeah.
Great. You are the first person we're interviewing who comes from the investment world, from finance. So very curious to hear some of your thoughts on these times and our company and the space. So to give our audience a little bit of a background, take me through a little bit, your background. How did you end up doing what you do?
Sure. So as you mentioned already, I'm the founding partner of my own fund called Selvedge Venture, which is a $20 million seed fund for deep tech and life sciences and healthcare investing in Europe. And we do globally, but we're based in Europe at least. So a lot of our current investments are here. I'm a VC investor by background as well. So prior to this, I was at Bayer, the big German pharmaceutical, crop sciences and consumer health company based in Berlin, as the director of venture investments. And prior to that, I was at Medici and Index Ventures, which are two of the large European, US venture capital funds focused on life sciences and drug development investing. I'm now focused on really investing and building up and helping founders at the intersection of life sciences, healthcare, and technology. So in particular with companies that can either generate or leverage healthcare or life sciences data. And as you just mentioned, we're delighted to be partners and investors in CCX, and super excited to help with the company's journey and all the rest of it. So happy to sort of expand on whatever you want to talk about.
Sure. So how do you what do you typically look for in companies that you invest in?
Sure. So as I mentioned a second ago, we're really focused at Selvedge on this intersection of sort of life sciences and traditional technology. And when I talk about that, what I really mean is the ability to use digital technologies, machine learning, AI tools, etc., and the vast amounts of healthcare data that's being able to be generated by both consumer biotechnology, so companies like 23andMe and Thriver, they've lowered the costs of generating biological data significantly over the last 10 years, which is great. And then separately, companies like CCX, which use alternative healthcare data sources, which may not be as obvious to people who don't work in the space, but are actually incredibly valuable and incredibly impactful to do things beyond just invest into things like interventions and therapeutics. I think that's the other thing, that there's a lot of, you asked about a perspective on finance. Well, within healthcare, I think there's a lot of misconception about when we think about healthcare investing, because a lot of it in Europe at least is focused on drug development and therapeutics, which is quite different actually to general healthcare, life sciences, healthcare data and disruptive technology. So we're really focused at Selvedge on trying to sort of meet that funding gap that exists right now, partly in Europe, but frankly globally, and really double down on this generation and leveraging of healthcare data to do cool stuff afterwards.
Yeah, that's great. So with really a focus on data, how has COVID-19 changed the world of healthcare data?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And honestly, it's changed it a lot. Let's be honest. The whole world now in 2021 is completely different to the world in 2019. And I can sort of give an analogy in the sense that I started Selvedge, the fund, basically at the same time the pandemic hit. And yeah,
I remember.
You were there.
I was there.
Right, you were literally there. So, and as time has gone on, it's been interesting because we've had this sort of weird dichotomy on one end of healthcare has become incredibly important for the world, right? This has been the first time in a lot of living memory where there's been a fundamental change in the way that we've had to interact with firstly everyone else, but secondly our own health and everything, frankly. But more importantly, we've sort of had to go through a crisis in healthcare investing such that people were just unclear about how to meet this demand and how to evolve. And I think now we're sort of reaching this inflection point where, because of the way that COVID changed things, an increased focus on decentralization, an increased focus on AI and machine learning tools to scale and not rely less on humans. And lastly, this massive focus on life sciences. I think it's safe to say actually that the industry that I'm in will reap the benefits of the pandemic, which is a strange thing to say, but the awareness and the sort of focus that it's generated for this space is absolutely huge. And for me, it's made a big difference. As strange as it may sound, it's been a terrible year for everyone, but actually the awareness that we have now around these big healthcare problems, chronic diseases, infectious diseases, it's just made our lives actually a bit easier to communicate the problems that we were trying to solve anyway.
Never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Exactly. Well, at least as long as that crisis is something that someone cared about, at least we have, some onus to talk about it more properly now.
So you and I have talked about crisis creating transformation in healthcare. Was this crisis big enough to create the step change in ecosystem change that's needed?
Well,
what's your perspective?
I can only give a perspective. Who we should really be asking is your co-founder, given that actually it's him that's having to do with all of this on a real basis, right? But I think what it has created is an onus and enough importance on things that we didn't place enough importance on before. So if we think about, for a lot of the more traditional venture investors in healthcare and life sciences and drug development, vaccines and infectious diseases and things whereby you didn't have as much commercial risk mitigated by just solving the problem of creating a therapeutic. It was actually a lot harder for people to invest in. And I think, vaccines previously were just not seen as a particularly profitable or exciting area. The pandemic changed that completely, right? That changed literally everything, in the sense that for a biologic advance, not a drug, but intervention, so to speak, for COVID and these advanced biologic vaccines, it accelerated the development timelines hugely. And actually what we've shown is that development timelines, if taken seriously and the whole world is behind it, can be accelerated hugely. You see the preliminary results from this vaccine as it's been rolled out now, it works. And it shows that actually, not to say that we were overly cautious before, but maybe there was a hybrid model that we could have done a bit better and worked a bit harder on in the past, which may have made life a bit easier in 2019 when all of this started, and we had. But these are just lessons learned, because I think the surefire thing we do know now is that infectious diseases and pandemics will happen in our history, and they're going to happen in a semi-regular basis. And for the next time this happens, we're going to be super prepared.
We'll be in a better position. So another thing that we've seen in recent months and weeks is people who don't typically get involved in equity investing, getting involved in equity investment, Robinhood, GameStop, and then I think even in that, combined with some of your other observations in healthcare, you've got people, investing in biotech companies and vaccine companies who really, are new to the space, to put simply. What do you think people typically misunderstand about our industry, or what advice would you have, for people who are thinking about getting involved in equity investing in healthcare for the first time?
Sure. So I'll touch on something I talked a little bit about earlier, which is this sort of split between when people think about healthcare and the ridiculous returns that people make from it. Often they're thinking about therapeutics. They're thinking about drug development and device development, which is the very traditional understanding of life sciences and healthcare, which, in Europe in particular, that's something that we've been very good at over the last, for many years actually, but it's also something that's highly risky, and the risk is very different to what people assume. A lot of people, when they invest in other areas, so if you invest in technology as a whole, what you're trying to mitigate is commercial risk for the most part, which is the ability to sell your product and have enough people buy it such that it makes it profitable. In life sciences and healthcare, it's all technical and scientific risk for the most part, and you're trying to solve a single scientific risk, which if it works, you mitigate that commercial risk entirely. So as an example,
you're only selling one thing, which is your asset, your company, and you only sell it once, and there's ready buyers. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And like an example of this would be if you created a brand new Alzheimer's therapeutic, which can cure that disease, it doesn't matter how much you charge for it. So long as you make it and it works and you can prove it and that drug gets approved, you will sell billions of dollars of that drug a year, guaranteed, because there are enough people with a need to mitigate it. In comparison, even in fintech or other heavily regulated areas, there's no asset class which can completely mitigate commercial risk in the same way. So I think the big misconception is that if you are a new person or a neophyte to investing in healthcare or in life sciences, be clear on what assets you are comfortable investing in and where you're willing to delegate that sort of understanding and control. Because if you're investing in companies like Moderna, one of the big providers of the vaccine, as an example, which has done incredibly well, that's a highly scientific, highly concentrated company, which is frankly very different to CCX, our company that we're sort of building this interview series off the back of, right? Which is still a healthcare company, but fundamentally different in product.
So what are those intermediate milestones, right? I mean, it's easy if you're investing in tech, right? There are milestones of revenue generation that are accomplished. In healthcare, given that there's not revenue till much later, what are the milestones that you look for?
Generally partnerships. So looking for a large commercial partner, and that could be in pharma, it could be in devices, it could be large, data companies like IQVIA as well, who are CROs too, which are able to effectively mitigate some of the...
Someone else does your diligence for you, essentially.
Well, not so much just diligence, but also a partner which allows you to sort of piggyback off their commercial and sales pathway, which you as the startup are frankly too small to have in-house. You want to find these large commercial champions that will work with you to build your product deeper and further. And an element of that will be to help themselves sell more of their products or, integrate deeper or understand what they do better, whatever it might be. But without, clear, defined revenues from your own product, you have to get partnerships or co-developments with other actors who are willing to sort of mitigate that a little bit and show revenue from other directions. And frankly, this is something that we've been talking about a lot about for CCX and how we're going to do that for this year, because in my
I think
that's the real mitigation, right?
People
involved.
Yeah, and I think some of the intermediate milestones that we see in healthcare, I think other industries would benefit from, trying to accomplish huge things where the financial payback is several years into the future. But, and I think in healthcare, we've done that, and we have a process in terms of clinical trials and, drug development because we've been forced to in healthcare, but what other industries? I mean, we look at the space programs, the space, companies, where there is zero revenue for many, many years, and until we send someone to the moon, right? I mean, there's, not exactly, but I think other industries may benefit from taking a similar approach, to the healthcare industry.
No, for sure. And this whole concept of patient capital, I think it's partly down also to this idea of, frankly, what Elon Musk talks about the whole time, which is a mission-based, view of your venture and a vision-based view of your venture. Yeah. And if you solve that, actually, you'll make a lot of money and be very profitable because the problem is so large.
It may take a while, but
it may take a while, but and I think the comparison to something like SpaceX is interesting because the regulations and everything there, it's actually from a different perspective because it's, there's still this future contingency. Space exploration will be valuable because we can mine asteroids or because we can get to Mars or whatever it might be. And people want to have set up effectively a governance system in place upfront now, such that it can govern a future relationship of what it could look like. And in healthcare, it's similar. But actually,
you're at the cutting edge. It's not how does this fit into the regulation. It's how do we work together to craft the regulation for the future state of healthcare.
Correct. Yeah. But the big difference in healthcare compared to something like space exploration is that space exploration actually only directly affects the astronauts and the people involved and the people in the companies, rather than actually the whole world who would use your product, so to speak. the end product of a space project would be, you mine bauxite on, the moon or whatever, and send it back to Earth, which people use because they smelt the bauxite to turn it to aluminum to put into planes or whatever. And in contrast to healthcare, the product actually is just given straight to humans to use, and humans pay for it. So there has to be this even higher level of regulation and scrutiny and this level of basically making sure that we really get it right before we start selling. And that whole idea of patient long-term thinking, healthcare is really the epitome of that in my mind, because actually, as it affects so many people in the world, and even if CCX, if we're successful in our mission in 20 years, it's a lot of people who are directly affected on our platform. I think for me, it's just really making sure that other industries also start to think in this long-term, instead of a knee-jerk reaction, instead of let's make profit quickly, it's actually how can we be sustainable, and how can we be profitable as well as useful and helpful to humanity at the same time.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much, Alasdair. One more question for you. Tell me about, this series is called Contingently Committed, and everything we do is about making contingent commitments. Tell me about a contingent commitment in your life.
I think, to be honest, my contingent commitment is with all of the companies I work with, to be completely honest, right? Like my contingent commitment to them is that I will work with them to help them achieve their goals. And their contingent commitment to me is they help work with me to achieve my goals. It just so happens that our goals in the end often tend to be the same thing. And I think as a venture investor, half of my life is about making the right contingent commitments with the right people. And I think working with CCX in particular, and with you and Richard and everyone else in the team, it's been a great sort of allegory and metaphor for everything else that we do with your platform and how we build up. And I think the world needs more of these contingent commitments where we promise to actually get stuff done, and we both mean it, and we both execute, rather than a lot of the half promises that we have in other aspects of our lives. So yeah, I think of a lot of contingent commitments because as a venture investor, that is basically your life.
Sounds good. Cool. Well, thanks for talking, Alasdair.
Likewise, Nathan. Thank you.
Bye.